in the fetid cradle of midnight's unyielding grip, where the plantation's shadows writhed like serpents birthed from the earth's black heart, a woman's soul splintered under the weight of a forbidden seed. The air hung thick as grave mist over the decaying manor, its timbers groaning like the bones of forgotten slaves buried beneath the soil. This was no ordinary night. It was the kind that clawed at the edges of reality, where the moon bled through ragged clouds, and the wind carried echoes of chains dragged across distant fields. The woman, Ilara, lay upon a bed of splintered wood and stained linens, her body a battlefield scarred by the master's relentless hunger. Her skin, once the color of rich earth, now bore the ashen pallor of the damned, marked by the invisible brands of generations of suffering. The room itself was a tomb of opulence turned ruin. Faded tapestries depicting hunts of old beasts fluttered in the draught, their threads unraveling like the frayed threads of her sanity. Outside, the plantation stretched like a vast, breathing entity, its cotton fields whispering secrets of blood-soaked harvests, and the gnarled oaks standing sentinel, their branches twisted into the shapes of accusing fingers. Ilara's world was one of perpetual dusk, where the sun dared not linger, and every shadow concealed the eyes of the restless dead. The master's hand, gnarled and veined like the roots of a poison vine, pressed deeper into her ribs, eliciting a gasp that echoed through the chamber, like the rattle of a dying breath. His breath, a rotting bloom of whiskey and decay, slithered across her face, carrying promises of a child born in shame, words that coiled around her heart like a noose. "Whisper not of light, my pet," he murmured, his voice a serpent's hiss in the dark. "For this seed I plant will bloom in the abyss, heir to shadows and sin." Ilara's eyes, wide as the moors of ancient graves, fixed upon the flickering candle on the bedside table, its flame dancing erratically, as if tormented by unseen specters. She felt the intrusion not just in her flesh, but in the very marrow of her being, a violation that echoed through the bloodlines of her ancestors, who had toiled and perished under the same cruel sun. Her womb, that prison of salt and sorrow, cradled the life within like a curse forged in the fires of hell, a child destined to inherit the master's venom and her own unspoken rage. The plantation's history seeped into every pore of the room. The walls, stained with the faint outlines of long-dried blood, seemed to pulse with the memories of those who had come before her, their spirits lingering in the corners like cobwebs spun from despair. Ilara's mind wandered through the labyrinth of her pain, envisioning the child as a twisted amalgamation of flesh and fury, its form already contorting in the darkness of her belly. The master's grip tightened, his fingers digging into her side like the claws of a beast claiming its prey, and she bit back a scream that would have shattered the night. "Feel the power in this union," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear with the cold touch of a grave dweller. "A legacy of dominance etched in your blood for eternity." Her response was a faint, broken murmur barely audible over the distant howl of the wind. "It will consume you, as it consumes me." Violence simmered beneath the surface, a storm building in the silence as the master's assault unfolded with the inevitability of a ritual sacrifice. His movements were brutal, rhythmic as the swing of a scythe through ripe flesh, each thrust an echo of the lashes that had scarred her back in the fields. Ilara's body arched in agony, her nails raking the sweat-dampened sheets, drawing thin lines of blood that trickled like crimson veins across the fabric. In the dim light, the horror revealed itself in fleeting glimpses, the glint of his ring, etched with arcane symbols that pulsed with an otherworldly glow, pressing into her skin and leaving behind welts that burned like branded sigils. A faint, unnatural warmth spread through her abdomen, as if the child within were already stirring, its presence a malevolent force clawing at the walls of its fleshy prison. The room grew colder, the air thickening with an unseen presence, perhaps the ghosts of other women who had endured this fate, their whispers threading through the darkness like spectral threads. As the act reached its harrowing climax, Ilara's vision blurred with tears that tasted of salt and bile, her mind fracturing under the weight of the curse taking root. The master's final whisper slithered forth, "This child will be my eternal shadow bound to serve," his voice fading into a laugh that echoed like the tolling of distant bells. She lay there broken and breathless, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach, where a faint, unnatural kick stirred, a sign of the abomination growing within, a seed not of love, but of vengeance and rot. In the final moments, as the master's shadow retreated into the hall, Ilara's eyes caught a glimpse through the cracked window, a pair of glowing eyes in the moonlit fields, watching, waiting, as if the earth itself were awakening to claim its due. The cursed seed pulsed within her, a heartbeat that did not align with her own, heralding the dawn of a legacy soaked in blood. And in the distance, the first faint cry of something unholy echoed, bleeding into the night like a promise of retribution yet to come. Beneath the watchful gaze of those glowing eyes in the moonlit fields, the night unfurled its crimson veil, and Ilara's body became a canvas for the overseer's unholy art. The plantation loomed like a spectral beast in the oppressive dark, its fields a labyrinth of whispering grasses that hid the bones of the forgotten, and its manor a hulking silhouette against the starless sky. Time itself seemed to bleed away in this forsaken place, where the air grew thick with the metallic tang of rust and regret, and the wind carried the faint rhythmic chants of spirits bound to the earth. Ilara, still reeling from the master's violation, lay in the dim confines of the overseer's quarters, a cramped, earthen-floored room reeking of damp soil and old blood, its walls adorned with rusted tools that glinted like the teeth of buried predators. Her gown, torn and stained, clung to her sweat-slicked skin, and the cursed seed within her womb pulsed like a second heartbeat, a foreign rhythm that synced with the distant cries of nightbirds. The plantation's silence was not mere absence. It was a living entity, a vast maw that devoured sound, leaving only the echo of past agonies to fester in the void. Outside, the oaks creaked in solemn procession, their branches etching shadows that danced like the ghosts of enslaved souls, forever trapped in the cycle of harvest and harvest. As the hours bled into eternity, Ilara's body betrayed her, crimson streams seeping from between her thighs to pool on the cold floor, each drop a testament to the violation that had taken root. The overseer, a gaunt figure forged from the same cruel mold as the master, circled her like a vulture sensing the kill, his eyes gleaming with the madness of one who had long ago surrendered to the darkness. His cane, a twisted length of blackened wood, etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the gloom, hovered above her like a promise of pain. "Whisper your secrets to the void, girl," he hissed, his voice a low rasp that slithered through the air, "for the night devours all cries, and your flesh will bear the marks of eternity." Ilara's screams, raw and primal, were indeed swallowed by the plantation's unyielding silence, muffled as if the very ground conspired to absorb her anguish, leaving only a hollow echo that reverberated in her mind. The overseer's cane descended with the inevitability of a storm's fury, carving symbols into her back, ancient sigils that twisted like serpents, drawn from the forbidden lore of the land's original inhabitants, now perverted into instruments of control. Each strike was a deliberate invocation, the wood biting into her flesh with a wet, tearing sound that mingled with the rustle of leaves outside, as if the earth itself recoiled in horror. Her body arched in agony, the pain radiating like fissures in cracked stone, and the blood that flowed traced the patterns of the symbols, forming a grotesque map of suffering that seemed to glow with an otherworldly luminescence. "Feel the weight of history in every cut," the overseer whispered, his breath hot and fetid against her ear. "These marks will bind you to the soil, long after your bones turn to dust." Ilara's response was a fractured murmur, barely escaping her lips. "The seed, it stirs, it hungers," her words tumbling out like cursed incantations, laced with the fear that the child within was feeding on her torment. Growing stronger with each lash, the violence unfolded in a ritualistic haze, the overseer's movements methodical, as if he were sculpting a monument to despair. The room filled with the coppery scent of blood, and shadows lengthened across the walls, taking on forms that whispered of unseen watchers, the glowing eyes from the fields, perhaps drawing closer with each passing moment. Ilara's mind drifted through layers of delirium, envisioning the symbols as gateways to the abyss, portals through which the spirits of the damned could seep into her flesh. The cane's edge, sharpened to a cruel point, etched deeper, revealing glimpses of bone beneath the skin, and a faint unnatural warmth spread from the wounds, as if the marks were alive, pulsing in time with the cursed seed. In the dim light, the horror manifested in subtle strokes, the way her blood pooled and congealed into shapes that resembled grasping hands, or the soft, wet sounds of her flesh parting. each one a stark reminder of the plantation's legacy of brutality. As the night wore on, Ilara's strength waned, her body a ravaged temple desecrated by the overseer's zeal. He paused at times, leaning close to trace the symbols with his fingers, murmuring incantations that echoed the master's whispers. This womb hollow and haunted will cradle only shadows. His voice a venomous thread in the tapestry of terror. She fought to hold on to her sanity, her lips forming silent pleas that dissolved into the void. End this. Let it end. But the overseer's laughter, a dry rattle like bones in a sack, only fueled the onslaught. The cursed seed within her seemed to respond, a sudden, violent twist in her abdomen that stole her breath, as if the child were awakening to the symphony of pain, its presence a malevolent force stirring the blood in her veins. When dawn threatened the horizon, the overseer's work complete, Ilara lay motionless, her back a tapestry of etched horrors that gleamed in the fading dark. The symbols, now permanent fixtures upon her flesh, thrummed with a faint, eerie energy, as if they held the power to outlive her, to etch themselves into the very fabric of the world. And in that fragile moment, as the first light pierced the gloom, a new sound emerged, a whisper from within. Not her own, but the child's, a faint, insidious murmur that slithered through her thoughts. We are one, mother, in blood and bone. In the grey light of a dawn stained with blood and betrayal, the figure in the doorway stepped forward, its glowing eyes piercing the veil between worlds, and Ilara's milk turned to acid in her veins. The plantation stirred from its nocturnal slumber like a wounded leviathan, its fields shrouded in a fog that clung to the earth like the breath of the damned, and the manor creaked under the weight of unseen watchers. Ilara, sprawled on the blood-slicked floor of the overseer's quarters, felt the cursed seed writhe within her, a parasite feeding on her agony, as the first pangs of labor twisted her body into a grotesque arc. The room, a dim cage of rotting wood and iron shackles, reeked of iron and decay, its walls weeping condensation that mirrored her tears, while outside, the oaks groaned in symphony, with the distant thunder of approaching storms. Her back, etched with the overseer's symbols, burned like branded runes, each one pulsing in rhythm with the child's insistent demands, as if the marks had awakened some ancient force buried in the soil. The air grew heavy with the scent of sour milk and fear, a miasma that seeped into the very fibers of the plantation, where generations of suffering had curdled into a legacy of venomous inheritance. Ilara's world narrowed to the hollow ache in her chest, her breast swollen and tender, a cruel bounty that the child within craved with ravenous fury. The violence erupted as the overseer loomed closer, his shadow merging with the figure's ethereal form, their presence a dual assault on her fractured spirit. He seized her by the shoulders, his fingers digging into the fresh wounds on her back like hooks into raw meat, forcing her upright with a brutality that echoed the master's earlier violation. "Let the sorrow flow, wretch," he whispered, his voice a serrated blade slicing through the silence, "for the child demands its tribute, and your body will yield." Ilara's nipples cracked under the pressure, splitting like overripe fruit, as milk mingled with blood and tears, streaming down in rivulets that stained her tattered gown. The pain was a thunderclap in her flesh, each drop a testament to the greed that consumed her, as if the child's hunger had transformed her essence into a weapon against herself. Whispers slithered through the air, the overseer's breath hot against her ear. "Feed the beast, or it will devour you whole," while from within a faint, insidious voice, the child's, echoed in her mind. "More? Give me more." Ilara's hands, trembling and bloodied, clutched at her breasts, the act of nursing a violent ritual that tore at her soul. The milk, tainted by the cursed seed, flowed not as nourishment, but as a corrosive flood, burning her skin where it touched, and the child's cries pierced the room like shards of glass, each wail a knife twisting in her gut. In the dim light, the horror revealed itself in flashes, the way her flesh split further with every pull, exposing raw tissue that glistened like exposed nerves, and the unnatural warmth that spread from her wounds. As if the child was siphoning her life force through the milk, the overseer held her fast, his grip tightening as he forced her to endure, the violence escalating into a frenzy of enforced submission. "Your pain is the price of legacy," he murmured, his words a venomous caress. "Let it flow until nothing remains." Ilara's screams, muffled by the plantation's eternal silence, bubbled forth as choked gasps, her body convulsing in protest, the child's demands growing more insistent, more savage. Blood and milk pooled at her feet, forming patterns that writhed like living serpents, and the figure in the doorway, now discernible as a spectral guardian of the fields, watched with unblinking eyes, its presence amplifying the terror. As the ordeal reached its peak, Ilara felt the child stir violently, its form pressing against her insides like a blade seeking escape. The milk's flow a torrent of anguish that left her hollowed and spent. Yet in the midst of the carnage, a new horror dawned. The child's cries began to shape words faint and malevolent, whispering promises of retribution that chilled her to the bone. And as the overseer's hold finally slackened, Ilara collapsed, her body a ruin of sorrow. But the child's glowing eyes, mirroring those from the fields, flickered open within her mind. A cursed vision that bled into the shadows of For the Shadow's cradle, where the mudblood's curse would fully awaken. In the wake of the child's malevolent whispers echoing through Ilara's shattered mind, the moonlit fields birthed a scream that rent the night, calling forth a creature forged from shadow and sin. The plantation, a festering wound upon the earth, pulsed with the rhythm of ancient grudges, its fields a sea of silvered stalks that whispered of bloodlines twisted by forbidden unions, and the manor a decaying throne for the horrors it had spawned. Ilara, her body a ravaged vessel of scars and sorrow, cradled the newborn in the dim glow of a storm-lashed dawn, the air thick with the metallic tang of fresh blood and the earthy rot of freshly turned graves. The child, dubbed Mudblood by the overseer and master in hushed tones that slithered through the halls like venom, lay in her arms, a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and darkness, its skin ashen and veined with unnatural black lines that pulsed like buried roots seeking light. The room, once the overseer's domain, now reeked of afterbirth and despair, its walls adorned with the faint outlines of spectral figures that seemed to gather closer, drawn by the child's first cries. Outside, the oaks stood as silent witnesses, their branches clawing at the sky, while the wind carried the distant howls of unseen beasts, as if the land itself recoiled from the abomination Ilara had borne. The cursed seed, now fully bloomed, stirred within the infant, its eyes black as the void between stars, mirroring her own fractured gaze, reflecting not innocence but the abyss that hungered for vengeance. They called it Mudblood, a word that clung to the child like a curse etched in bile, uttered in the overseer's gravelly whisper as he loomed in the doorway, his face twisted in a mask of revulsion and greed. "This thing, this Mudblood, will be the chain that binds you forever," he murmured, his voice a low hiss that slithered across the room, "for it carries the master's mark and your tainted blood. The vessel for the shadows." Ilara, her hands trembling around the infant's fragile form, felt the violence stir anew as the child's tiny fingers curled into claws, scratching at her skin with unnatural strength, drawing beads of blood that glistened like dark jewels. The overseer's words fueled the tension, his presence a catalyst for the brutality that simmered beneath the surface. As if the plantation's legacy demanded sacrifice, the violence erupted in a frenzy of instinct and horror, the child's cries escalating into ear-piercing wails that seemed to summon the moon itself, its light filtering through the window to illuminate the infant's eyes, voids that swallowed all warmth. Ilara, driven by a mix of maternal terror and the echoes of her own pain, attempted to soothe it, but the child lashed out, its mouth opening to reveal sharpened gums that bit into her cracked nipple with the force of a predator, tearing flesh in a spray of milk and blood. "Feed me, mother, or feel the void," the child seemed to whisper in a voice not its own, a faint, insidious murmur that echoed in Ilara's mind, blending with the overseer's taunts. He stepped closer, his cane raised once more, striking her shoulder with a crack that reverberated like thunder, the impact sending shockwaves through her body and dislodging the child from her grasp. The infant hit the floor with a thud, its cries morphing into a guttural growl, and in that moment, the horror manifested. The child's skin rippled, shadows coalescing around it like a shroud, as it crawled toward her with unnatural speed, its nails gouging the wooden planks. Whispers filled the air, the overseer's breath hot against her ear. "Control it, or we'll end it here," while the child's voice, a chilling echo, responded in kind. "We are eternal, in blood and bone." Ilara fought back, her hands grasping at the child in a desperate struggle, their bodies entwining in a violent dance of survival and retribution, her nails raking its flesh only to heal instantly, leaving her own wounds to bleed freely. The room darkened further, the shadows twisting into forms that whispered of the field's guardians, their glowing eyes peering through the cracks. As the confrontation reached its climax, the child fixed its gaze on the overseer, its scream shattering a window and summoning a gust that knocked him back, blood trickling from his ears, a harbinger of the mudblood's power. Ilara, collapsing in exhaustion, watched in dread as the infant rose, its form outlined by an otherworldly aura, the shadows cradling it like a throne of night. And in the final, harrowing instant, the child's eyes locked onto the moon once more, its scream fading into a silent promise of vengeance, a cursed silhouette that bled into the brutality of Five the Whip's lullaby, where the master's fists would claim their due. In the aftermath of the child's unearthly scream that shattered the window and summoned the storm, the master's shadow slunk back into the manor, his fists clenched like the jaws of a ravenous beast, eager to feast on flesh once more. The plantation writhed under a sky bruised with thunderclouds, its fields a labyrinth of mud and memory, where the wind howled through the stalks like the lamentations of the long dead. And the manor stood as a monolith of decay, its halls echoing with the faint, rhythmic drip of blood from unseen wounds. Ilara, her body a tapestry of scars and fresh agonies, huddled in the dim confines of the child's cage, a crude iron contraption in the corner of the room, its bars cold and unyielding, forged from the same metal that had chained generations before her. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and impending rain, mingling with the metallic tang of her earlier bloodletting, while shadows danced across the walls like spectres, reenacting the plantation's cursed history. The child, a mudblood, sat within its confines, its eyes, black voids that swallowed the flickering candlelight, fixed upon her with an intensity that felt like a blade pressed to her spine, its tiny hands gripping the bars, as if drawing strength from the iron's ancient malice. Outside, the oaks swayed in the gale, their branches scraping against the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry, and the ground trembled with the subtle vibrations of spirits stirring beneath. Awakened by the child's presence and the master's return, the master's fists found her ribs again, pounding with the relentless force of a blacksmith's hammer upon an anvil, his laughter a raven's croak that echoed through the chamber like the caw of a harbinger bird. "Whisper your pleas to the void, wretch," he murmured, his voice a low, venomous hiss that coiled around her like a noose. "For this lullaby is your legacy, etched in every bruise." Ilara's body convulsed under the assault, her skin splitting like old parchment, the tears in her flesh revealing glimpses of bone and sinew that gleamed in the dim light, each strike a deliberate invocation of pain that resonated through the room. The child watched, unblinking, its gaze a silent witness that seemed to feed upon the violence, its tiny fingers tightening on the bars until they whitened, as if the cage itself were a conduit for the growing darkness within. Whispers filled the stifling air, the master's breath hot and fetid against her ear. "Feel the rhythm, feel the song," he taunted, his words a serpentine rhythm matching the cadence of his blows, while from the cage, a faint murmur escaped the child's lips, a chilling echo that blended with the storm. "Watch. And wait." Ilara's ribs cracked under the onslaught, the sound a thunderous report that harmonized with the distant lightning, and blood welled from the wounds, trickling down her sides in rivulets that formed patterns on the floor, resembling the symbols carved into her back. The horror manifested in fleeting, brutal details, the way her skin peeled back with each impact, exposing raw tissue that pulsed with an unnatural glow, or the faint, wet snap of fracturing bone that mingled with the rain's patter. The violence escalated into a frenzied ritual, the master's laughter growing louder, more deranged, as if the act were a perverse dance to summon deeper shadows. He gripped her hair, yanking her head back to force her to meet his eyes, his whisper cutting through the chaos, "Your pain births my empire," while the child's gaze intensified, its form beginning to shimmer with an otherworldly aura, the bars of its cage creaking under some invisible pressure. Ilara fought back with the last of her strength, her nails raking his arm and drawing blood, but the effort only fueled his fury, his fists descending again in a hail of blows that left her gasping, her vision blurring with tears and blood. As the storm reached its peak, the master's assault waned, his form silhouetted against the flashing sky, But the child's eyes, now glowing with the same unearthly fire as the field guardians, locked onto him, a silent promise of retaliation stirring in the air. And in that suspended moment, as Elara lay broken on the floor, the cage's bars began to bend inward, the child's whisper cutting through the din. The lullaby ends, and the shadows rise. The master's laughter faltered, his gaze drawn to the warping metal, a cursed image of rebellion that bled into the whispers of six, the bloodline's whisper, where the etched names of the broken would demand their due. In the wake of the child's cage bars, bending like the bones of the earth itself, Elara fled to the cellar's depths, where the walls hungered for the ink of her blood, and the shadows whispered secrets of retribution long buried. The plantations, underbelly, a labyrinth of stone and silence sprawled beneath the manor like the gnarled roots of a poisoned tree, its air thick with the fetid breath of decay and the faint, earthy tang of forgotten graves. Elara, her body a map of bruises and fractures from the master's fists, descended into this abyss, the cold stone steps slick with moisture that seeped from the walls like tears from the damned, each one echoing her ragged breaths and the distant rumble of the storm above. The cellar was a tomb of memories, its corners shrouded in cobwebs that clung like the remnants of shattered souls, and the air vibrated with the low hum of spirits trapped in the mortar, echoes of those who had toiled and perished under the plantation's yoke, their essence etched into the very stone. The child's presence lingered behind her, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness as it followed on unsteady legs, pressing its ear to the walls as if listening to the heartbeat of the earth, while the symbols on Elara's back throbbed in sympathy, pulsing with the pain of generations. Outside, the oaks creaked in the wind, their branches scraping the foundation like claws on a coffin lid, and the ground above shifted with the weight of the master's footsteps, a reminder that no sanctuary could shield her from the cycle of violence. In the dim flicker of a single lantern, Elara's fingers, raw and bleeding, clawed at the wall, carving her pain into the unyielding stone with a shard of rusted iron she had pried from the floor. "Whisper the names of the broken," she murmured, to herself, her voice a fragile thread in the oppressive dark. "Let the stone remember what flesh forgets." Each stroke was a violent act of defiance, her nails splintering as she etched the master's name first, the letters gouged deep with forceful drags that drew blood from her fingertips, splattering the wall in crimson patterns that resembled the veins of the earth. The child watched, its ear pressed to the cold stone, absorbing the language of scars as if it were a sacred tongue, its tiny form trembling with an unnatural energy that fed on her agony. "The blood speaks," the child whispered in a voice that echoed the wind's howl. "It calls for more." The violence surged as Elara's frenzy grew, her hands moving with the rhythm of a ritual sacrifice, the iron shard slicing into her palms with each inscription, the pain a searing fire that blurred the line between torment and release. "You will pay for every mark," she hissed through gritted teeth, her words a venomous whisper that slithered through the air, directed at the absent master, while the child's response came as a faint, chilling murmur. "We etch, we endure." Blood flowed freely, pooling at her feet and seeping into the cracks of the floor, where it formed rivulets that twisted like serpents, carrying whispers of the dead, names of long-forgotten souls who had suffered in these very walls. The horror revealed itself in stark flashes, the way her flesh tore with each thrust, exposing glistening tendons beneath, or the faint, wet sounds of her blood hissing against the stone, as if the wall itself were alive, drinking her essence to fuel the spirits within. As the carvings multiplied, the cellar seemed to awaken, the stones groaning under the weight of the inscribed names, and shadows coalesced into vague forms that hovered at the edges of the light, murmuring in unison with the child's ear pressed tight. "The bloodline whispers back," Elara gasped, her voice breaking as she carved the overseer's name next, the iron biting deeper, her vision swimming with the metallic taste of her own life force. The child, now mimicking her motions, scraped, its nails against the stone, drawing faint lines that glowed with an otherworldly light, its whispers growing louder. Father's end, mother's revenge. In the climax of her exertion, Ilara collapsed against the wall, her hands a ruin of shredded skin and bone, but the carvings pulsed with a malevolent energy, the names writhing as if alive. And in that moment, a new horror emerged. The stones began to bleed from the etched lines, a crimson flow that seeped toward the child, who opened its mouth to drink, its eyes flaring with the fire of the awakened dead. The cellar's whispers built to a crescendo, foretelling a storm of vengeance, a cursed vision of the bloodline rising that bled into the icy grasp of 7, the rape of winter, where the master's shadow would fall once more. In the cellar's bleeding stones, where the etched names pulsed with the child's stolen lifeblood, the master's shadow descended once more, cloaking the frozen plantation in a shroud of wine-soaked malice and unyielding night. The winter had claimed the plantation like a vengeful spectre, its fields a barren wasteland of ice-crusted earth and skeletal stalks that whispered secrets of buried horrors, while the manor loomed as a frozen tomb, its walls cracking under the weight of hoarfrost and forgotten screams. Ilara, her body a fragile husk of scars and hollowed strength, huddled in the dim chamber above the cellar, the air thick with the biting cold that seeped through the cracks, carrying the metallic tang of blood and the faint, earthy decay of the grounds below. Years had passed in the blink of shadowed eyes. The child, once an infant of unnatural fury, now a girl on the cusp of womanhood, her form twisted by the curse, her skin pale as the snowdrifts piling against the windows, and her eyes twin abysses that reflected the void. The room, a derelict sanctuary of splintered furniture and faded drapes, echoed with the howl of the wind outside, a sound like the wails of the damned trapped in the oak's frozen branches. While the child's presence lingered in the corners, a silent predator cloaked in the darkness. The master's return brought with it the stench of fermented wine and unbridled greed, his footsteps crunching on the iced floorboards as if the very ground rebelled against his weight, and the cymbals on Ilara's back throbbed in rhythm with the storm, a reminder that winter's grasp was but a prelude to deeper violations. The master's shadow fell over her again, his breath hot with wine and malice, a fetid cloud that clashed with the frigid air, turning her skin to gooseflesh as he loomed like a beast from the abyss. "Whisper your submission, wretch," he murmured, his voice a serpentine hiss that slithered through the gloom, "for the cold will not spare you, and neither will I." Ilara, trapped in the vice of his gaze, felt the violence ignite as his hands gripped her arms, fingers digging into the old wounds like icicles piercing flesh, drawing beads of blood that froze in the chill. The child, now a girl of sharpened instincts and hidden fury, slipped beneath the floorboards, her small hands clutching the rusted knife stolen from the kitchen, its blade cold and serrated, whispering promises of retribution in her ear. The assault unfolded with the brutality of a winter gale, his movements a frenzied ritual under the dim light, each touch a violation that echoed the plantation's cursed legacy. "Feel the frost of my claim," he whispered, his lips brushing her ear with a heat that burned like acid. "Your body will yield to the season's hunger." Ilara's struggles were met with force, his fists slamming into her sides, cracking ribs that splintered like thin ice, the pain radiating through her like shards of frozen glass. Blood mingled with melting snow on the floor, forming crimson pools that reflected the storm outside, and the horror manifested in fleeting glimpses, the way his nails tore at her skin, leaving trails that wept in the cold or the wet. Tearing sound of fabric and flesh as he forced her down. Whispers filled the frozen air, his voice a venomous chant. "The child will learn from your weakness, Isti, while from beneath the boards." The girl's faint murmur responded, "Watch." "And wait," her words a chilling echo that fueled Ilara's resolve. The violence escalated, his weight pinning her as the knife in the child's hand gleamed in the hidden dark, her eyes glowing with the same unearthly fire that had marked her birth. As the ordeal reached its peak, Ilara's gaze locked onto a crack in the floorboards, where the girl's face peered through, her expression a mask of shadowed fury. The knife poised like a fang in the gloom, and in that suspended moment, as the master's grip tightened, a drop of blood from Ilara's wound seeped through the boards, landing on the girl's blade, a cursed fusion that ignited a spark of vengeance. The master's laughter faltered as a faint scratching sound emerged from below, the floorboards creaking under the girl's weight, a harbinger of retribution that bled into the inferno of 8 the bonfire, where the flames would consume all. In the smouldering aftermath of the master's faltering laughter, and the girl's blade poised beneath the floorboards. The plantation's frozen soil thawed under the promise of flames as men gathered to claim the child, only to find her eyes ablaze with the fire of the damned. The air hung heavy with the acrid scent of charring wood and distant smoke, the plantation a wasteland of melting ice and shadowed hollows where the oaks stood as blackened sentinels, their branches reaching like the fingers of the underworld toward a sky bruised with storm clouds and flickering embers. Elara, her body a ruin of frostbitten scars and unquenchable rage, watched from the manor's threshold as the men, merchants of flesh and secrets, drawn by the master's whispers of accursed prize, converged upon the grounds, their boots crunching through the thawing mud like the march of grave robbers disturbing the dead. The girl, no longer the trembling child but a vessel of shadowed fury, stood at the center of their circle, her skin aglow with an inner heat that melted the snow at her feet, her eyes burning with a light that seared the soul, forcing grown men to avert their gazes, lest they weep tears of blood. The plantation itself seemed to pulse with the rhythm of her heartbeat, the earth cracking open to reveal roots twisted like veins of fire, and the wind carried the faint echoes of ancestral chants, as if the spirits of the enslaved rose with the smoke to witness the reckoning. Her body, forged in the furnace of inherited pain, radiated a heat that warped the air around her, drawing the men closer like moths to a lethal flame. Unaware that their greed had awakened a storm of retribution, they tried to sell the girl, their voices a chorus of bartered promises and leering bids, but her eyes burned with a light that made men weep, illuminating the darkness of their souls. "Whisper your price for the Shadowborn," the master murmured, his voice a serpentine hiss that slithered through the gathering. But beware the fire in her veins. The girl, her form trembling with suppressed fury, fixed her gaze on the nearest man, a burly figure with hands scarred from the whip, and whispered back in a voice like cracking embers, "You will burn for what you've taken." The violence erupted as she lunged, her stolen knife flashing in the gloom, slicing across his arm with a wet tear that sprayed blood like molten sparks, the wound cauterizing instantly under her touch, fusing flesh and metal in a grotesque seal. Flames leaped from her fingertips as if summoned from the abyss, engulfing the man in a shroud of fire that consumed his screams, his skin blistering and peeling like parchment in a forge, the horror manifesting in the way his eyes melted in their sockets, leaving trails of viscous fluid that steamed in the cold air. "Feed them to the flames," she hissed, her body a furnace of rage that radiated unbearable heat, drawing the others into the inferno, their clothes igniting with a whoosh that echoed the plantation's buried agonies. The master recoiled, his face twisted in terror, but the girl was upon him next, her hands pressing against his chest, branding his flesh with symbols of vengeance that glowed like branded iron, his cries a hymn to the dead that harmonized with the crackling fire. The blaze spread with unnatural speed, devouring the gathered men as they flailed in the conflagration, their bodies twisting into charred silhouettes that danced like shadows of the damned, the air filled with the stench of burning hair and bone. Elara, witnessing the carnage, felt the heat wash over her like a cleansing tide, her whispers joining the girls, "Let the fire claim what was stolen," as the flames leaped higher, revealing glimpses of spectral forms emerging from the earth, their eyes glowing in solidarity. The violence peaked in a symphony of destruction, the girl's screams a piercing hymn that shook the oaks, her body alight yet unconsumed, a beacon of wrath that reduced the men to ash and memory. As the fire reached its zenith, the plantation's heart exposed in the glowing embers, the girl's eyes locked onto Elara, a cursed vision of triumph and torment, her form wreathed in flames that whispered of alliances forged in the dark. In the smoldering remnants of the bone fire, where the ashes of the fallen men whispered secrets to the wind, the girl stepped into the forest at midnight, her skin a canvas of glowing sigils that pulsed with the hunger of forgotten gods. The ancient woods loomed like a living entity, its trees twisted into grotesque forms that clawed at the starless sky, their bark etched with the scars of centuries of rituals and spilled blood, while the ground beneath her feet squelched with the decay of leaves and the bones of those long devoured by the earth. Ilara's daughter, now a woman forged in the crucible of fire and shadow, moved with the grace of a spectre, her body marked with the sigils of forgotten gods, rune-like patterns that writhed across her flesh like serpents, glowing with an unearthly light that drew the mist closer, as if the forest itself conspired to conceal her from the prying eyes of the plantation. The air hung thick with the scent of damp moss and iron-tinged rot, carrying the faint chorus of chains rattling in the distance, and the wind carried echoes of shattered bones, the spirits of the enslaved stirring from their earthen graves, their forms materializing as wisps of fog that twisted around her ankles like manacles. The plantation's silhouette faded behind her, a dark stain on the horizon, while the sigils on her skin burned hotter with each step, feeding on her rage and the memories of violence etched into her bloodline, drawing her deeper into the heart of the woods where the coven awaited. She walked with purpose, her breath a visible shroud in the frigid night, her hands clenched around the rusted knife that still dripped with the remnants of the bonefire's victims, its blade whispering promises of further carnage. "Whisper your oaths to the shadows," a voice slithered from the trees, the spirits of the enslaved answering her call in a chorus of chains and shattered bones, their ethereal forms emerging from the undergrowth. Translucent figures bound in spectral fetters, their eyes hollow voids that reflected the glow of her sigils. The girl raised her arms, the knife glinting as she invoked the bargain, her voice a low murmur. "Grant me the power of the forgotten, and I shall offer the blood of the living." The spirits responded in kind, their whispers a cacophony of rattling links and fractured cries. "Blood for blood, bone for bone, we rise with your fury." The violence unfolded as the ritual demanded, the spirits converging upon her in a whirlwind of ethereal force, their chains lashing out to graze her skin, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the sigils, each cut a deliberate invocation that amplified her power. "Feel the weight of our chains," one spirit hissed, its form pressing closer, the cold metal biting into her flesh like teeth, tearing strips that exposed glistening muscle beneath, the horror manifesting in the way her blood steamed upon contact, forming patterns in the dirt that resembled the symbols of her ancestors. She endured the assault, her knife slashing at the air to seal the pact, severing a spectral chain that splintered into shards, embedding in her arm and pulsing with unnatural heat, as if the spirits were claiming a piece of her in return. Whispers filled the clearing, the coven of shades encircling her. "Your flesh for our freedom," they murmured, their voices a venomous tide, while she responded through gritted teeth. "Then let the fire of vengeance consume them all." The girl's body convulsed as the bargain took hold, the sigils flaring brighter, her veins bulging with the influx of spectral energy, and the violence escalated when a spirit's chain wrapped around her throat, squeezing until her vision blurred, blood trickling from her lips in a crimson offering that soaked the earth, awakening roots that twisted upward like grasping hands. As the ritual climaxed, the forest seemed to breathe with her, the spirits merging into her form, their essence a storm of chains and bones that fortified her resolve. But at a cost. The girl's eyes glazed with an otherworldly sheen, her skin now etched with fresh wounds that wept a dark fluid, hinting at the corruption within.